On Valentine's Day 1900, the most ambitious construction project in the Thousand Islands reached its zenith. 300 craftsmen swarmed across Hart Island, transforming a simple outcropping into a 120-room Rhineland castle that would cost $2.5 million, equivalent to $92 million today. George Boldt, a Prussian immigrant who had risen from dishwasher to hotel magnate, stood watching his dream materialize. Every tower, every stone, every carved detail was a love letter to his wife Louise. But within 4 years, this monument to devotion would become America's most famous architectural ghost. Abandoned mid-construction, its rooms never occupied, its promise never fulfilled. What darkness could stop such love? What tragedy could turn a palace into a perpetual ruin? Chapter 1. The Valentine that would never be given, February 1904. The telegram arrived at Boldt Castle's construction office on a Wednesday afternoon. George Boldt, standing in what would have been the grand ballroom, read 3 words that would change everything. Louise is dying. The hammering stopped. The stone cutting ceased. 300 workers, Italian masons, German carpenters, Scottish stonemasons, stood frozen as their employer, the most successful hotelier in America, collapsed against an unfinished wall. Within hours, he would board his private yacht for Philadelphia. Within days, his wife of 30 years would be gone. And this castle, 93% complete, would never see another day of construction. But let's go back. Back before the grief. Back before the palace. Back to when George Boldt was nobody, just another German immigrant with calloused hands and impossible dreams. Hart Island measures just 5.5 acres, a speck among the 1,800 islands dotting the St. Lawrence River between New York and Ontario. Before Boldt purchased it in 1895 for $35,000, it was called Hart Island, a rocky, tree-covered bump considered too small and irregular for serious development. Boldt saw something different. He saw the perfect canvas for the ultimate gift, a full-scale Rhineland castle that would prove what a dishwasher could become in America. The statistics alone stagger the imagination. 120 rooms, 17 bathrooms, 3 kitchens, a bowling alley, a theater, an underground tunnel connecting to a powerhouse on a separate island, 6 floors if you count the towers, 30,000 square feet of living space. The exterior walls were bluestone from Pennsylvania and granite from Oak Island. The roof would be Spanish tile. Every door would be hand-carved mahogany. Every fireplace would be Italian marble. Every window would be beveled glass from Europe. But numbers tell only the surface story. The deeper truth lies in the details that George obsessed over. He demanded that the castle's silhouette, when viewed from the water, match exactly the famous castles along the Rhine River he'd seen as a boy in Prussia. The heart-shaped island would be reshaped, literally, into a more perfect heart, with retaining walls and imported earth defining its romantic outline. Louise's initials would be carved into stone throughout the structure. Heart motifs would appear in the woodwork, the metalwork, the very floor tiles. This wasn't merely a summer home. This was theater. This was proof. This was a poor immigrant boy's defiant answer to every slight, every condescension, every locked door he'd faced climbing America's brutal social ladder. George Charles Boldt was born in 1851 on the island of Rügen, Prussia. He arrived in New York in 1864, 13 years old, speaking broken English, possessing exactly 50 cents. His first job was washing dishes in a basement kitchen on Canal Street. His fingers bled from the lye soap. His back ached from the endless standing. But unlike the thousands of other German boys washing dishes in Manhattan basements, George noticed things. He noticed which customers the maitre d' seated first. He noticed which wines the wealthy ordered. He noticed how the successful men held themselves, spoke, gestured. He was, even then, a student of power, and he was determined to master its language. By age 25, he'd saved enough to purchase a small lunch counter. By 30, he managed the Philadelphia Club, where he met Louise Augusta Carrer. She was 21, the daughter of a wealthy Buffalo merchant, educated, refined, everything George's rough immigrant background was not. Their courtship was unlikely. Their marriage in 1877 was even more so. But Louise saw past the accent, past the working-class origins. She saw the burning intelligence, the ferocious ambition, the tender heart beneath the driven exterior. And George saw in Louise something he'd never stop pursuing: acceptance, refinement, belonging. She became his bridge to the world he'd observed from kitchen doorways. He would spend the rest of his life trying to give her everything that world could offer. The couple's rise was meteoric. In 1888, William Waldorf-Astor hired George to manage the new Waldorf Hotel in Manhattan. 5 years later, when Astor's cousin built the adjoining Astoria Hotel, Boldt managed both, creating the legendary Waldorf-Astoria, the most prestigious hotel in America. Presidents stayed there, Rockefellers dined there. The annual revenue exceeded $1 million. George's personal income reached $50,000 a year, $1.8 million in today's money. But wealth wasn't enough. George and Louise also purchased the Bellevue Stratford in Philadelphia, transforming it into another crown jewel. They summered in the Thousand Islands, where America's industrial elite built their own castles and compounds. Yet even here, among the Vanderbilts and Pullmans, George felt the invisible walls. Old money recognized new money. German accents marked their speakers as forever foreign, forever climbing, forever trying. So George decided to build something that could not be dismissed, could not be condescended to, could not be anything less than magnificent. He would build Louise a castle that would stand for centuries. He would reshape an entire island into a perfect heart. He would create something so beautiful, so impossibly romantic, that it would erase every memory of washing dishes, every slight, every closed door. The plans were drawn in 1895. Construction began in 1900. And George Boldt, the immigrant dishwasher turned hotel emperor, prepared to give his beloved wife the greatest Valentine gift in American history. He had no idea he was building a mausoleum. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Obsession. The architectural drawings arrived from Philadelphia in January 1900. George Boldt had commissioned the city's most prestigious firm, G.W. and W.D. Hewitt, to design not just a house, but a complete island transformation. The blueprints covered the office table in sheets 4 feet wide, the main castle, a powerhouse, a gatehouse complex, a yacht house, even a playhouse shaped like a miniature medieval castle for the Boldt children. The style would be Rhineland Revival with French Renaissance flourishes, basically every European castle George had admired in books and paintings during his rise from poverty. The main structure would feature a 6-story tower on one corner, creating the dramatic vertical element essential to authentic castle architecture. The exterior walls would rise sheer from the water's edge in some places, creating the illusion that the castle grew organically from the island's granite bedrock. But here's where George's hotel management experience shaped the design. Despite the medieval aesthetics, Boldt Castle would incorporate every modern convenience available in 1900. Central heating, electric lighting throughout, 11 bathrooms with hot running water, speaking tubes connecting rooms, a dedicated laundry with mechanical washing equipment, an ice-making plant in the powerhouse. The castle would be a machine wrapped in romanticism, 19th century appearance concealing 20th century engineering. The site preparation alone required 18 months. Hart Island's original contours were deemed insufficiently romantic. George hired dredging crews to reshape the shoreline into a more perfect heart. They brought in hundreds of tons of earth to build up the southern end. They constructed massive retaining walls of dressed stone to hold the new configuration. They planted thousands of trees, elms, maples, oaks, to create mature-looking landscaping immediately. Patience was not George Boldt's virtue. He wanted perfection, and he wanted it quickly. The foundation work began in spring 1900. Scottish stonemasons laid granite blocks weighing up to 5 tons each. The basement level would house the castle's mechanical heart: coal-fired boilers feeding steam radiators, water pumps, electrical generators, supplementing the island powerhouse, cold storage rooms, wine cellars, and servants' working spaces. This underworld would be invisible to guests floating through the staterooms above, but it would consume 40% of the construction budget. Material procurement became a logistical marvel. Pennsylvania bluestone for the exterior walls arrived by barge, 700 tons of it. Granite blocks came from Oak Island, just 2 miles away, where Boldt had purchased quarrying rights. The Spanish roof tiles were manufactured in Akron, Ohio, then shipped via rail and boat. Mahogany for the doors and paneling came from Honduras. Italian marble for the 17 fireplaces was carved in Siena before its Atlantic crossing. The workforce peaked at 300 men during summer months. The ethnic composition reflected the immigrant wave's reshaping turn-of-the-century America. Italian masons, skilled in stone cutting and setting, formed the largest contingent. German carpenters handled the intricate woodwork. Scottish stonemasons supervised the most complex structural elements. Irish laborers performed the heavy moving and digging. A handful of French artisans specialized in ornamental plasterwork. These men lived in temporary barracks on nearby islands, paid weekly, fed from a central kitchen. The work was dangerous. Stone-cutting equipment could sever fingers. Scaffolding collapses killed or maimed. The St. Lawrence's brutal winters forced suspension of work from November through March. But the pay was good. $2.50 per day for skilled craftsmen, $1.50 for laborers. Compare this to George Boldt's daily income of approximately $137, and the castle's true mathematics emerge. One man's luxury required hundreds of men's labor. The construction schedule was aggressive, bordering on reckless. George wanted the castle substantially complete by summer 1903, giving his team just 3 building seasons to accomplish what might reasonably take 5 or 6. This meant double shifts during peak months. It meant working by lantern light into the evening. It meant constant pressure, constant urgency, constant demands for more speed, more perfection, more dedication. Louise visited frequently during construction, arriving aboard the Boldt yacht, Louise. She approved paint colors, furniture arrangements, garden layouts. In photographs from these visits, she appears graceful, composed, wearing the white linen suits fashionable among wealthy summer visitors. But she was also growing increasingly frail. Heart trouble, the doctors said. Nothing immediately serious, but concerning. She tired easily. She spent more time resting, less time entertaining. George noticed, of course, but he channeled his anxiety into construction. The castle would be his gift to her health. A summer paradise where she could recover, relax, enjoy the river breezes. He convinced himself that stress from managing multiple hotels was the problem. Once the castle was complete, once they could spend entire summers on Hart Island, she would improve. The castle wasn't just romance, it was medicine. By late 1903, the exterior was essentially complete. The towers rose dramatically against the sky. The Spanish tile roof gleamed red. The bluestone walls, pointed with white mortar, created the striking contrast George had envisioned. From the water, passing steamships slowed so passengers could photograph the emerging wonder. Newspapers called it the millionaire's rose crown jewel. Society columns speculated about the opening season parties the Boldts would host. Interior work consumed the winter of 1903-1904. Plasterers created ornate ceiling medallions. Woodcarvers shaped mahogany into flowing vines and heart motifs. Electricians installed crystal chandeliers. Painters applied gold leaf to decorative elements. Tile workers laid intricate patterns in the bathrooms and kitchens. The castle was 93% complete. George planned to present it to Louise on Valentine's Day, 1904. The ultimate romantic gesture from the ultimate romantic. Then Louise's health collapsed. Chapter 3. The Machine Behind the Beauty. While sculptors carved romantic hearts into mahogany banisters, another story unfolded in the spaces guests would never see. Boldt Castle's true innovation lay not in its medieval towers or grand ballrooms, but in the invisible infrastructure that would make aristocratic living possible. The pipes, wires, boilers, and service corridors that formed the castle's mechanical nervous system. Start in the powerhouse, constructed on a separate island 300 feet northeast of the main castle. This two-story stone building housed the electrical generation equipment, coal storage, and pump mechanisms that would feed the castle's modern conveniences. 2 coal-fired steam boilers generated electricity through belt-driven dynamos, the same technology powering New York City's newest skyscrapers. These generators produced enough current to light 600 incandescent bulbs throughout the castle, plus power for the mechanical refrigeration system and water pumps. The powerhouse required its own dedicated staff. 2 engineers working rotating 12-hour shifts, coal stokers, maintenance mechanics. Coal consumption would reach 15 tons per month during summer occupation, delivered by barge and stored in bins holding 60 tons. This fuel cost alone exceeded the annual wages of most American families. The powerhouse was luxury's engine room, burning fossil fuel to create the illusion of effortless elegance. An underground tunnel connected the powerhouse to the castle, one of George Boldt's proudest innovations. Measuring 400 feet long and 6 feet high, this passage allowed service staff to move between buildings invisibly, carrying supplies, fuel, and equipment without disturbing guests' aesthetic experience. The tunnel also housed the castle's main utility conduits: steam heating pipes, electrical cables, water supply lines, and sewage drainage pipes. Walking this passage today, you can still see the metal hangers and pipe supports, rusting now but originally painted a utilitarian gray. The castle's heating system represented cutting-edge technology. Steam from the powerhouse boilers traveled through insulated pipes, first through the tunnel, then into a distribution manifold in the castle's basement. From there, smaller pipes fed 135 cast-iron radiators distributed throughout the building's 6 floors. Each radiator could be individually controlled via brass valves, allowing precise temperature regulation in each room. The system could maintain interior temperatures of 70 degrees, even when St. Lawrence ice flows surrounded the island. Water supply involved equally complex engineering. The island had no fresh water source, so Boldt constructed a water tower on the mainland, 3 miles away. Electric pumps pushed river water through filtration beds of sand and gravel, then into the elevated storage tank. Gravity and supplemental pumps provided water pressure throughout the castle, enough force to supply 11 bathrooms simultaneously. The hot water system featured a 300-gallon copper boiler in the basement, keeping water at scalable temperature around the clock. The electrical wiring alone required 6 miles of copper cable, snaked through walls, ceiling spaces, and under floors. Every room had multiple outlets and switches, a luxury when most American homes still used gas lighting. The dining room featured a crystal chandelier with 48 electric bulbs, controlled by a dimmer switch, rare technology in 1904. George could create romantic candlelight effects with the turn of a dial. But the most revealing infrastructure occupied the castle's basement and service wings, the spaces where staff would work, largely unseen, to maintain the illusion of effortless grandeur. 3 commercial-scale kitchens occupied the basement level. The main kitchen featured 2 coal-fired ranges, each 6 feet long, capable of preparing banquet meals for 50 guests. A separate baker's kitchen included brick ovens for breads and pastries. The servants' kitchen, smallest and plainest, fed the staff itself. These were not the romantic spaces photographed in promotional materials. These were industrial workspaces, hot, smoky, demanding 16-hour days from cooks, scullery maids, and kitchen assistants. Cold storage rooms, insulated with cork and sawdust, held fresh meat, dairy, and produce. Before mechanical refrigeration, maintaining these rooms required daily deliveries of ice blocks, cut from the frozen St. Lawrence in winter, stored in sawdust-insulated ice houses, then hauled by service staff as needed. The castle's mechanical refrigeration system, driven by the powerhouse generators, represented a quantum leap in food storage, but still required constant monitoring, adjustment, and ammonia coolant refilling. The laundry occupied its own wing. Copper boilers heated water for washing. Mechanical wringers, hand-cranked rollers, squeezed excess, water from linens. Drying racks filled a separate room. Ironing tables accommodated 3 workers simultaneously. The weekly laundry from a household this size would fill several trucks. Bed linens, tablecloths, napkins, towels, the Boldts' personal clothing, staff uniforms, cleaning rags. This work fell entirely to female staff, typically Irish or German immigrant women earning $6 to $8 per week, less than a third of male laborers' wages. Service corridors and back stairs created a parallel circulation system. Guests would never encounter servants carrying coal scuttles, dirty dishes, or chamber pots. The architecture enforced social invisibility, with narrow servants' stairs tucked behind false walls, rising from basement to attic without intersecting public spaces. This Victorian-era design philosophy separated visual beauty from the labor that maintained it. The servants' quarters occupied the castle's attic level, small rooms under the eaves, minimally heated, furnished with iron beds and simple dressers. Windows were smaller here, ceilings lower, finishes plain. The contrast with the family's accommodations, just 2 floors below, could not be starker. The castle's vertical geography reflected America's social stratification. Wealth and comfort occupied the middle floors, machinery and labor the top and bottom. George Boldt estimated the castle would require a permanent staff of 18 during summer occupation: butler, head housekeeper, 3 maids, 2 cooks, kitchen assistant, laundress, 2 groundskeepers, 3 boatmen, 2 engineers, and 2 general laborers. Their annual wages would total approximately $7,500, about 3% of George's personal income. This ratio, 1 staff member for every 7 rooms, earning collectively what the owner made in 3 weeks, defined Gilded Age mathematics. The castle, then, was not simply a building but a machine for displaying wealth. Its towers and turrets were merely the visible carapace. The real structure consisted of furnaces, pumps, sewage systems, servant corridors, all the unglamorous mechanisms that allowed wealthy Americans to live like European nobility. George Boldt understood this perfectly. His hotel management experience taught him that luxury was less about beautiful surfaces than invisible, efficient service. The tragedy is that this machine would never fully operate. The gears would never fully mesh. The staff quarters would remain empty. The kitchens would never feed banquet guests. The elaborate infrastructure, representing millions of dollars and thousands of labor hours, would sit idle, slowly rusting, gradually collapsing into ruin. Because in February 1904, before the castle could receive its first occupants, Louise Boldt's heart finally gave out. Chapter 4. The Golden Dream That Never Was. The guest list was already being drafted. The Vanderbilts would come, certainly. The Pullmans had summer homes nearby. John Jacob Astor IV had promised to visit by yacht. Louise Boldt had begun planning the castle's inaugural season. The summer of 1904 would be their grand social debut on Hart Island, the moment when George's decades of striving would finally be validated by the attendance and approval of America's most elite families. The formal dining room, occupying the castle's northwest corner, was designed to seat 24 guests at a single mahogany table. Crystal chandeliers would cast flattering light on society women's jewelry and men's evening wear. The china pattern, specially commissioned from Haviland in Limoges, France, featured intertwined hearts and the Boldt family crest. Each place setting included 8 pieces: dinner plate, salad plate, bread plate, soup bowl, teacup, saucer, and 2 serving dishes. Louise had ordered service for 40 guests, anticipating multiple dinner parties per week throughout the summer season. The menu planning revealed the expectations of Gilded Age entertaining. A typical formal dinner required 8 courses: oysters, soup, fish, entree, roast, salad, dessert, and fruit with cheese. The kitchen staff would prepare these courses simultaneously, requiring precise coordination and timing. Wine pairings accompanied each course: white wine with fish, red with roast, champagne with dessert. A single dinner party could consume a dozen bottles of wine, plus aperitifs and after-dinner cordials. The ballroom, 2 stories tall, occupying the castle's center, was designed for dancing and musical performances. George had commissioned a Steinway grand piano built to special order in Hamburg, Germany. The maple floor was sprung, mounted on flexible joists, to provide bounce for waltzing. 3 crystal chandeliers, each weighing 400 pounds, would illuminate evening entertainments. The room could accommodate 60 guests comfortably, 80 if the dancing was enthusiastic. Louise had specific visions for how this space would be used. Sunday afternoon concerts featuring musicians from the Syracuse Symphony. Thursday evening dances, with couples arriving by yacht and launch. Theatrical performances staged by professional actors from New York. These entertainments would position the Boldts at the center of Thousand Island's social life, fulfilling George's decades-long ambition for acceptance among America's aristocracy. The library occupied the castle's southeastern corner, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves designed to hold 10,000 volumes. George had already begun purchasing the collection: leather-bound classics, contemporary literature, travel narratives, hotel management texts. A gentleman's library required certain titles: Shakespeare, Milton, classical histories, regardless of whether anyone actually read them. The library was as much status symbol as reading room, proof of cultivation and intellectual legitimacy. But Louise's favorite space was the morning room, a small, intimate chamber on the 2nd floor, facing east to catch sunrise light over the St. Lawrence. This room was hers alone. Pale yellow wallpaper with white trim, furniture upholstered in floral chintz, a small writing desk with views across the water. Here she would write correspondence, read, sketch garden plans. This was the castle's emotional heart, the space where private life would unfold beyond the performance of wealth. The Boldts' children, Clover and George Jr., would occupy bedrooms on the 3rd floor. Clover, their daughter, was married by 1904 and living in Philadelphia, but she would visit with her husband. George Jr., still in his 20s, maintained his own apartment in Manhattan, but was expected to spend summers on Hart Island. Their rooms were elegant but not ostentatious. Comfortable accommodations for adult children who had their own establishments. George and Louise's master suite occupied the entire northeastern corner of the second floor. Bedroom, sitting room, his dressing room, her dressing room, and a shared bathroom with marble floor and porcelain fixtures. The bedroom featured a canopy bed carved from Santo Domingo mahogany, imported Italian marble fireplace, and French doors opening onto a private balcony overlooking the river. This was where George and Louise would wake to sunrise views, where Louise would recover her health in peaceful surroundings, where they would enjoy the private intimacy that 30 years of marriage had deepened rather than diminished. The morning routine would be scripted. A maid would deliver morning coffee at 8. George would read newspapers in the sitting room while Louise dressed. Breakfast would be served in the breakfast room, a smaller, casual space adjacent to the main dining room, at 9. Then George might review correspondence with his secretary, while Louise walked the gardens with the head gardener, planning seasonal plantings. Afternoons meant leisure, boating on the river, reading in the library, receiving visitors arriving by yacht. The Thousand Islands summer season was a continuous social circulation. Lunches at one estate, tea at another, dinner at a third. The Boldts would both host and attend these gatherings, gradually becoming fixtures of this wealthy, insular world. Evenings would showcase the castle's dramatic lighting. As darkness fell, servants would illuminate the exterior, floodlights making the towers glow against the night sky, creating a beacon visible for miles. Interior lighting would transform the grand spaces into jewel boxes of warm, golden light. Guests approaching by boat would see the castle as it was meant to be seen. Magical, improbable, impossible. A European fantasy planted impossibly in the New World. The operating costs for this lifestyle would be staggering. George estimated $30,000 annually just for summer operations. Staff wages, food and wine, fuel, boat maintenance, landscaping, routine repairs. This equaled the lifetime earnings of 3 average American families. For George Boldt, it represented about 6 weeks' income. This was how the rich demonstrated their richness, not merely by possessing wealth, but by spending it with elegant carelessness. But Louise's health was deteriorating. The symptoms her doctors had dismissed as minor were intensifying. She tired easily. She experienced chest pains. Her breathing became labored after slight exertion. In January 1904, she collapsed at their Philadelphia residence. George summoned the finest specialists. They diagnosed advanced heart disease. The prognosis was guarded. On February 7, 1904, Louise Augusta Carrer Boldt died at age 53. The castle was 93% complete. The furniture was being installed. The landscaping was planted. The dream was ready. But the dreamer was gone. Chapter 5. The day the hammers stopped. The telegram reached Hart Island at 2:37 p.m. on February 7, 1904. The Western Union operator in Alexandria Bay rowed across personally, understanding the message's weight. He found the construction foreman, Michael O'Reilly, an Irish immigrant who'd supervised stonework for 15 years, inspecting mortar joints on the castle's northern tower. O'Reilly read the telegram twice. Mrs. Boldt passed this morning. Stop all work immediately. Discharge all workers. Close the island, George Boldt. 15 words. 30 years of marriage, 4 years of construction, $2.5 million in expenses. Ended in 15 words. O'Reilly walked to the center of the construction site and rang the iron bell that signaled shift changes. 300 men stopped mid-task. Hammers froze mid-swing. Saws ceased cutting. In the sudden silence, you could hear the St. Lawrence lapping against the new stone retaining walls. "Mr. Boldt's wife has died," O'Reilly announced, his voice breaking. "We're done. Finish what you're holding and pack your tools." The men stood, stunned. Many had worked here for 4 years, watching the castle rise from bare rock. They'd developed pride in this project. It was the most beautiful thing most of them would ever build. Some had carved their initials into hidden places, secret signatures declaring, "I made this." Now O'Reilly was telling them to walk away, leave it unfinished, abandon their masterpiece. But they understood. These were working men who knew grief, who'd buried wives and children. They recognized the mathematics of heartbreak. No castle, however grand, could compensate for such loss. George Boldt had built this as a gift for Louise. Without Louise, it was merely stone and wood, hollow and purposeless. The Italian masons began collecting their trowels and levels. The German carpenters wrapped their hand planes and chisels. The Scottish stonecutters covered their diamond wheel saws with oilcloth. They worked silently, respectfully, as if departing a funeral rather than a construction site. By sunset, Hart Island was empty. Tools remained where they'd been set down. Scaffolding still hugged the towers. Drop. Cloths covered unfinished floors. Interior doors leaned against walls, waiting for hinges. Paint cans sat opened, their contents beginning to skin over. The castle looked like a photograph of daily work, except everyone had vanished. George Boldt never returned. He sent his secretary to Hart Island once, to retrieve personal items Louise had left in the construction office. Otherwise, he avoided the Thousand Islands entirely. The castle, his ultimate love letter, became unbearable to contemplate. Every stone was a memory. Every tower was a promise broken by mortality. He remained in Philadelphia, managing the Bellevue Stratford Hotel with the same ruthless efficiency that had built his fortune. But friends noted changes. The famous Boldt warmth, his ability to remember guests' names, their preferences, their families, dimmed noticeably. He became more solitary, more formal. He'd lost not just his wife, but his purpose for wealth. What good was success without someone to share it with? What value had money if it couldn't prevent death? Meanwhile, Hart Island sat abandoned. The first winter was brutal. Snow piled against the unfinished walls. Ice formed on the Spanish roof tiles. Without heat, the interior's moisture condensed and froze, cracking plaster and warping woodwork. The steam heating system, never activated, gradually seized. Copper pipes corroded, brass fittings tarnished green. Local residents initially expected George would resume construction after the mourning period ended. Surely he wouldn't abandon such an investment. But months became years. The castle remained frozen in time, 93% complete, forever unfinished, a monument to interrupted love. Vandals discovered the island in 1906. Teenagers from Alexandria Bay arrived by rowboat, curious about the famous abandoned castle. They broke windows, pried off brass fixtures, carved initials in mahogany doors. Word spread. More vandals came. Interior marble was stolen and sold. Light fixtures disappeared. Even sections of decorative plasterwork were chiseled off and carried away. The castle was being dismantled piecemeal, scavenged for souvenirs and recyclable materials. Weather accelerated the decay. Without maintenance, roof leaks developed. Water infiltrated walls, freezing and expanding each winter, cracking stone and loosening mortar. The Spanish tiles, improperly secured, began sliding off and shattering on the terraces below. Windows, broken by vandals, allowed rain and snow inside. Floors rotted. Ceilings collapsed. Nature was reclaiming what had been so expensively wrested from it. The powerhouse fared worse. Its machinery, valuable copper and iron, was systematically stripped. The boilers were pulled out and sold for scrap metal. The dynamos disappeared. Even the underground tunnel was vandalized, its copper pipes and electrical cables yanked from the walls and hauled away. The island's infrastructure, representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment and installation, was reduced to empty shells and rusting fragments. George Boldt watched this destruction from a distance, if he watched at all. He never discussed the castle publicly. When asked by journalists about his famous unfinished project, he would say simply, "My wife is dead. The castle is dead." He refused to sell the property, though offers arrived regularly from wealthy families wanting to complete the construction. The castle wasn't a business asset to be liquidated. It was Louise's memorial, and it would remain exactly as she'd left it. In 1916, George Boldt died at age 65, 12 years after Louise. His obituaries celebrated his hotel innovations and immigrant success story, but they all mentioned the castle, the famous folly, the monument to lost love, the grandest gesture in American romantic history. His children inherited the property. They also chose not to complete or sell it. For 50 years, 3 generations of Boldts let the castle crumble rather than see it finished without Louise. This decision transformed Boldt Castle from private mansion into public symbol. It became the Thousand Islands' most famous landmark, not for its beauty, though it remained beautiful, but for what it represented, the ultimate grand gesture, the price of love, the way dreams die when dreamers do. Tourists began arriving to photograph the ruins, to walk the empty rooms, to contemplate mortality and marriage and the futility of trying to capture love in stone. The castle George built to prove his love became famous precisely because that love ended. The tragedy made it legendary. The abandonment made it art. Chapter 6. The Resurrection, when New York State bought a dream. By 1977, Boldt Castle was dying. 73 years of abandonment had reduced the once grand structure to a spectacular ruin. The roof was more hole than tile. Interior walls had collapsed into rubble piles. Trees grew through third-floor windows. Pigeons nested in the ballroom's destroyed chandeliers. Local newspapers ran editorials titled, "Tear It Down," and "The Eyesore on Hart Island." The Boldt family still owned the property, still refused to sell, still maintained their vigil of intentional neglect. But the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority, the government agency managing the international bridges connecting New York to Ontario, saw something different. They saw the region's greatest tourism asset rotting into the St. Lawrence. They saw economic potential in romantic tragedy. They saw that restoration, however expensive, might be cheaper than demolition. On May 18, 1977, the Bridge Authority purchased Hart Island and Boldt Castle for $1. Yes, $1. The Boldt heirs finally surrendered the property on one condition. Any restoration must preserve the castle's unfinished character. They didn't want it completed. They wanted it stabilized, frozen in its 1904 state, permanently interrupted, forever memorial. This single-dollar sale transferred one of America's most famous properties for the price of a candy bar. But the real cost was yet to come. The Bridge Authority commissioned structural engineers to assess restoration feasibility. The report was devastating. The castle needed $15 million in immediate repairs just to prevent total collapse. Long-term restoration would cost $40 million. The Bridge Authority's annual budget was $2 million. The math was impossible. But the Bridge Authority's director, John Baudet, proposed a radical solution. Open the castle to tourists immediately, charge admission, and use the revenue to fund ongoing restoration. Turn the ruin into its own salvation. Make the tragedy pay for its resurrection. The concept was controversial. Preservationists argued the castle was too dangerous for public access. Collapsed floors, unstable walls, lead paint, asbestos insulation. Insurance companies refused to provide liability coverage. Engineers warned that visitor traffic would accelerate structural decay. Local residents worried that commercializing the romantic ruin would destroy its mystique. But Boldt persisted. In June 1977, just 1 month after purchase, Boldt Castle opened to visitors. Admission was $2. The bridge authority hired a small boat to ferry tourists from Alexandria Bay. No electricity, no plumbing, no interior restoration yet. Visitors walked through rooms open to the sky, climbed stairs missing handrails, explored spaces where weeds grew through floorboards. It was like touring a romantic catastrophe. The first summer attracted 18,000 visitors. They came to see the famous love story made tangible, to walk where George and Louise's dream had died. They photographed the carved hearts still visible in mahogany woodwork. They stood in the ballroom imagining the dances that never happened. They left $2 each, $36,000 total revenue that first summer. It wasn't enough. Nowhere near enough. But it was a start. The Bridge Authority adopted a triage approach: stabilize first, restore later. Emergency repairs focused on preventing further collapse. Crews installed temporary roofing over the most vulnerable sections. They shored up weakened walls with steel bracing. They removed the most dangerous debris. They sealed windows and doors to prevent vandalism. These unglamorous repairs consumed the first decade's revenues. Visitors saw little visible improvement, just the slow arrest of decay. The real turning point came in 1982, when the Bridge Authority made a crucial decision. All future admission revenue would fund restoration in perpetuity. This wasn't a 5-year project with a defined endpoint. This was a permanent commitment. The castle would pay for its own gradual resurrection, year by year, room by room, indefinitely. Completion wasn't the goal. Preservation was. This model proved revolutionary. By 1985, annual visitors exceeded 50,000. By 1990, 100,000. Each visitor's admission fee became a small brick in the restoration wall. Slowly, painfully, the castle began to heal. The restoration work revealed construction details invisible in 1904. When crews removed collapsed plaster, they discovered the castle's structural skeleton. Massive timber beams, iron reinforcement, brick infill between stone walls. They found marks made by individual workers, carved names, penciled calculations, even crude jokes written on surfaces meant to remain hidden forever. These discoveries humanized the restoration, connecting 1980s workers to their 1900s counterparts. One discovery particularly moved the restoration crew. Behind a collapsed wall in the servants' quarters, they found a work jacket with M. Bianchi sewn into the collar, an Italian mason's jacket, left behind when O'Reilly rang the bell on February 7, 1904. The jacket still hung on its nail, waiting for a man who'd walked away 76 years earlier. The crew preserved it behind glass in the castle's museum, a tangible link to the workers whose labor built this monument. The Bridge Authority also made a controversial decision. They would not complete the unfinished elements. The castle would remain 93% done, exactly as George left it. Rooms that lacked final plasterwork would stay unplastered. Doors that were never hung would remain absent. The architectural incompleteness would be permanent, not failure to finish restoration, but faithful preservation of intentional abandonment. This philosophy created a unique museum experience. Visitors walk through completed rooms filled with period furniture, then turn a corner into raw spaces, showing exposed lath and unfinished framing. The contrast is jarring, powerful. You experience both the dream and its interruption, beauty and ruin, completion and abandonment existing simultaneously. It's architecture as frozen narrative. By 1995, the castle had welcomed over 2 million visitors. Admission revenue exceeded $25 million cumulative. The bridge authority had restored the roof completely, rebuilt collapsed floors, replastered major public rooms, installed climate control systems, added accessibility features, and constructed a new visitor center. The castle wasn't finished, would never be finished, but it was saved. The resurrection story attracted national media attention. PBS featured Boldt Castle in a documentary about American architectural preservation. National Geographic published a photo essay. The New York Times ran a feature headlined, "Love Story Rises from Ruins." The castle's abandonment had made it famous, but its gradual restoration made it beloved. Proof that even the most broken things might be repaired with patience and dedication. George Boldt had tried to build a monument to perfect love. He failed. Love proved imperfect, mortal, cruel. But the ruin he left behind became something he never imagined. A monument to persistence, to incremental hope, to the slow work of healing what's broken. The castle he abandoned in grief became, through decades of patient restoration, a symbol of resilience. Sometimes the grandest gestures are the ones we never intended to make. Chapter 7. The Hidden Stories in the Stones. The restoration work at Boldt Castle did more than repair walls and floors. It excavated buried histories, the stories of people whose labor built the castle, but whose names were erased from its official narrative. Archaeological investigation and archival research conducted between 1985 and 2010 revealed a more complex, more troubling story than the simple romantic tragedy tourists came to see. Start with the Italian stonemasons. For decades, they existed in the historical record only as Italian workers or foreign laborers, anonymous, interchangeable. But restoration coordinator Patricia Beauchamp began investigating immigration records, ship manifests, and local census data in 1989. She discovered names: Giuseppe Mancini, Antonio Bellini, Carlo Romano, brothers Salvatore, and Marco Ferrara. These men weren't just workers. They were master craftsmen who'd trained in Italian quarries before immigrating to America seeking better wages. Beauchamp found that most Italian masons working at Boldt Castle came from the same region, Carrara, Tuscany, famous for its marble quarries. They'd been recruited by labor contractors who promised $2.50 per day, triple what they earned in Italy. But the contractors took a 50-cent commission from each day's wages, reducing actual pay to $2. The men lived in crowded barracks on neighboring islands, sleeping 6 to a room, paying inflated prices for food at contractor-owned stores. After expenses, they sent home perhaps $5 weekly, still more than Italian wages, but a fraction of what they'd been promised. The working conditions were brutal. Stone cutting generated silica dust that destroyed lungs. The masons called it stone sickness, chronic coughing, bloody phlegm, gradual suffocation. Giuseppe Mancini died in 1902 at age 34, his death certificate listing consumption, the era's catch-all diagnosis for lung disease. He's buried in Alexandria Bay's Catholic Cemetery, one of at least 8 Boldt Castle workers in that graveyard. Their headstones are small, plain, marked only with names and dates. No mention of their contribution to the Thousand Islands' most famous landmark. The discovery of these graves prompted Beauchamp to investigate workplace accidents. She found hospital records from Alexandria Bay's small clinic documenting broken bones, crushed fingers, severe lacerations, the routine violence of construction work. One entry from July 1902 describes Antonio R., age unknown, Italian laborer, crushed right hand when stone block shifted during placement, 3 fingers amputated. Antonio R. received no compensation beyond his day's wage. He likely returned to Italy, unable to work, 3 fingers short, carrying a hidden cost of American grandeur. the Irish laborers, who performed the heaviest unskilled work, fared even worse. They earned £1.50 daily for digging, hauling, and clearing. Many were recent immigrants, desperate for any employment. The labor contractors exploited this desperation ruthlessly. One investigative journalist visiting the site in 1901 reported that Irish workers were treated little better than mules, worked dawn to dusk, housed in sheds, and dismissed without notice if they complained. Then there were the women, almost entirely erased from the construction narrative. Restoration researchers discovered employment records showing that between 15 and 20 women worked at Boldt Castle during construction. They cooked for the work crews, washed work clothes, cleaned the barracks, and performed finishing work like cleaning windows and scrubbing floors. Their wages ranged from 50 cents to $1 daily, 1/3 to 1/2 of male laborers' pay for equally long hours. One name emerged from obscurity: Bridget O'Connor, a 26-year-old Irish immigrant who cooked for the construction crews from 1901 to 1904. Kitchen records show she prepared 3 meals daily for up to 300 men. She worked from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days weekly, earning 75 cents per day plus room and board. When work stopped in February 1904, she was dismissed with 2 weeks' wages. She disappears from the historical record after that. No forwarding address, no subsequent employment trace, just gone. The restoration also uncovered evidence of a darker history: child labor. Photographs from the construction period show what appear to be teenagers among the work crews. Researchers cross-referenced these images with census records and discovered that at least 6 workers were between 14 and 16 years old. Legal under 1900 laws, but ethically troubling by modern standards. These boys performed dangerous work for minimal wages, their youth and inexperience making them particularly vulnerable to accidents. One photograph particularly haunts modern viewers. It shows a work crew taking a break, sitting on stone blocks. In the back row stands a boy who appears perhaps 15, holding a stonemason's hammer nearly too heavy for him to lift. His name was likely Francesco Rossi, age 14 according to census records, living in worker barracks, listed as apprentice mason. He was doing adult work for apprentice wages, learning a trade that would likely kill his lungs before he reached 40. The Bridge Authority's restoration coordinator faced a difficult question. How do you tell this story without destroying the romantic narrative that draws tourists? How do you honor these workers without making visitors feel complicit in their exploitation? The solution was imperfect but honest. In 2005, the castle added a permanent exhibit titled "The Hands That Built Hart Island." This exhibit includes photographs of workers, copies of wage records, excerpts from hospital documents, and information about the 8 workers buried in Alexandria Bay. It doesn't moralize or explicitly condemn George Boldt. He paid prevailing wages, and his contractors operated within legal boundaries. But it makes visible what was designed to be invisible: the human cost of grandeur, the labor behind luxury, the workers who built a monument to someone else's love while living in barracks and sending money home to families they might not see for years. The exhibit also includes Giuseppe Mancini's gravestone photograph and this caption: Giuseppe Mancini came from Carrara, Italy, in 1899. He cut stone for Boldt Castle until his death from lung disease in 1902. He was 34 years old. His contribution to this castle is permanent. His sacrifice should not be forgotten. Modern visitors stop at this exhibit longer than at any other. They read the names, they study the photographs, they calculate wages and hours, and realize that the romantic castle they came to see was built on mathematics most would find unconscionable today. The castle's beauty doesn't diminish, but it becomes more complicated, more human, more honest about the world that created it. George Boldt wanted to build a monument to love. Instead, he accidentally built a monument to labor and to the slow work of historical recovery, bringing invisible workers back into the stories told about the structures they created. Chapter 8: The Castle's Second Life: Tourism, Preservation, and Memory. Today, Boldt Castle welcomes 130,000 visitors annually. They arrive by tour boat, private yacht, and water taxi from Alexandria Bay, crossing the same waters George Boldt traveled by steam launch. The ticket price is now $14 for adults, 700 times the 1977 admission fee, though adjusted for inflation, it's roughly equivalent. This steady revenue stream generates $1.8 million annually, every dollar dedicated to ongoing preservation and restoration. The visitor experience has been carefully curated to balance accessibility with historical authenticity. The castle now has electricity, climate control, and modern restrooms, concessions to contemporary expectations. But the restoration philosophy remains faithful to the Bridge Authority's original vision. Preserve the interruption. Don't complete the dream. Finished rooms display period-appropriate furniture, not original pieces, which were sold or destroyed, but authentic reproductions and period antiques that suggest how the spaces might have looked. The Grand Ballroom, finally roofed and weatherproof after 2010's restoration, hosts about 60 weddings annually. Couples marry where George and Louise never danced, surrounded by mahogany paneling and crystal chandeliers, paying $3,500 for 4 hours. The irony is rich. A monument to marriage that ended in death becomes the site of new marriages beginning. The castle accommodates this without commentary, serving as backdrop to joy it was never meant to witness. The wedding, revenue over $200,000 yearly, funds specific restoration projects. Recent work includes rebuilding the castle's original elevator shaft, restoring ornamental plasterwork in the library, and reconstructing the servants' staircase. Each project is documented photographically and made part of the permanent archive. The castle is simultaneously museum and construction site, finished product and ongoing process. Tour guides, 18 seasonal employees, mostly local college students, receive extensive training in both romantic narrative and labor history. They're instructed to tell both stories. George and Louise's tragedy, yes, but also Giuseppe Mancini's death, Bridget O'Connor's wages, the Irish laborers' conditions. This dual narrative creates cognitive dissonance for some visitors who came expecting simple romance and encounter complicated economics instead. The most popular photograph location is the 4th-floor tower room, offering panoramic views across the Thousand Islands. Visitors stand where no Boldt family member ever stood, looking out windows that were installed not in 1904, but in 1998. They're photographing restoration as much as original construction. The castle is a palimpsest, layers of intervention visible to anyone looking carefully. But most don't look carefully. They see romance, tragedy, beauty, and that's sufficient. The gift shop, occupying the former service wing, generates additional revenue selling castle-themed merchandise, postcards, books, replica architectural elements, even heart-shaped pendants supposedly inspired by the castle's decorative motifs. The best-selling item is a coffee table book titled Love Among the Ruins, featuring dramatic photographs of the castle during its abandonment phase. Tourists buying images of decay, drawn to destruction as much as reconstruction. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority reinvests 20% of annual revenue into regional economic development, making Boldt Castle an engine of local prosperity. Alexandria Bay's economy depends heavily on castle-related tourism, hotels, restaurants, boat tour companies, souvenir shops. The town's population is just 1,000, but summer brings 10,000 daily visitors. The castle George built for private luxury now sustains working-class livelihoods. Another irony he couldn't have anticipated. Academic researchers have discovered the castle too. Architectural historians study its construction techniques. Labor historians analyze employment records. Gender studies scholars examine the erasure and recovery of female workers. Graduate students write dissertations titled Monuments to Capital, Labor and Luxury in Gilded Age Architecture, and Ruins and Romance, the Commodification of Architectural Tragedy. The castle has become text, subject to endless interpretation and reinterpretation. The restoration work continues indefinitely. Current projects include stabilizing the powerhouse, finally receiving attention after decades of neglect. Engineers are rebuilding the foundation, replacing rotted floor joists, installing new windows. The goal isn't to recreate the 1904 powerhouse, but to preserve its ruins safely, preventing collapse while maintaining the structure's obvious decay. It's architectural taxidermy, preserving death's appearance while preventing actual death. Climate change poses new challenges. The St. Lawrence's water levels fluctuate more dramatically than in the past. Winter ice, once predictable, now varies wildly. Some years none at all, other years massive accumulations crushing the stone retaining walls. The castle's Spanish tile roof, already fragile, faces increasing storm intensity. Preservation budgets must now include climate adaptation costs, reinforced foundations, improved drainage, emergency repair funds for storm damage. The Bridge Authority has established an endowment, currently $3.2 million, to ensure the castle's perpetual maintenance. Investment returns supplement admission revenue, creating financial stability for long-term preservation. The goal is to make the castle self-sustaining indefinitely, never dependent on government appropriations or private donations. George Boldt's monument to love has become a monument to financial planning, probably not the legacy he imagined. Social media has transformed the castle's cultural role. Instagram features thousands of posts tagged Boldt Castle, mostly wedding photos, sunset shots, aerial drone footage. The castle has become content, endlessly reproducible, circulating in digital networks George couldn't have conceived. Influencers stage photo shoots on the island, monetizing the romantic aesthetic George created. The castle generates value in forms he'd never recognize, serving purposes he never intended. Yet something essential remains. Despite commercialization, despite academic analysis, despite Instagram aestheticization, visitors still respond emotionally to the central story. A man loved his wife so much he built her a castle, and when she died, he couldn't bear to finish it. That narrative simplifies a complex reality, erases workers' contributions, ignores economic exploitation, but it touches something universal about love, loss, and the futility of trying to make permanence from feeling. The castle George Boldt, abandoned in grief, has been resurrected by strangers, sustained by tourists, analyzed by scholars, and commodified by entrepreneurs. It's no longer his. It belongs to everyone now, which means, in a way, Louise finally hosts the parties George planned. Just not the guests they expected. Chapter 9. What the Castle Teaches Us: Legacy, Labor, and Love in Stone. Stand on Hart Island today, and you're standing at the intersection of three American mythologies: the immigrant success story, the romance of wealth, and the dignity of labor. Boldt Castle embodies all three and the contradictions between them. George Boldt's biography is quintessentially American. Immigrant boy arrives with nothing, works brutal jobs, observes and learns, rises through merit and determination to spectacular success. It's the story we tell ourselves about opportunity, mobility, and democratic access to prosperity. George proved the myth true through extraordinary talent, relentless work, and strategic brilliance. By any measure, his life was a triumph, but his triumph required hundreds of other lives. Giuseppe Mancini's silica-destroyed lungs, Bridget O'Connor's 17-hour workdays, the Irish laborer's $1.50 wages. The castle that symbolizes George's success was built on a foundation of exploitation that was legal, normal, and accepted in 1900, but appears barbaric to modern sensibilities. This tension between celebrating individual achievement and acknowledging its human cost defines Gilded Age history. The castle also teaches lessons about wealth's ultimate futility. George Boldt could buy hotels, hire hundreds, reshape islands, and import marble from Italy. But he couldn't buy Louise's health. He couldn't purchase more time. His money could build a monument, but couldn't prevent the loss that made the monument meaningless. This is the castle's deepest truth. Even spectacular wealth fails against mortality. The grandest gesture, this $2.5 million stone declaration of love, proved powerless against death. Yet there's something moving in the gesture's very futility. George didn't build the castle as investment or status symbol. He built it as gift, as expression, as love made tangible. When Louise died, he could have finished construction and sold the property, recouping some investment. Instead, he abandoned it, preferring financial loss to betraying the gift's purpose. The castle was for Louise, or for no one. This absolutism, however economically irrational, reveals a depth of feeling that wealth didn't diminish. The castle's preservation teaches different lessons. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority's patient, revenue-funded restoration demonstrates that some historical structures can save themselves if we're willing to work incrementally across decades. Too often, preservation requires emergency intervention, major donations, or government funding. Boldt Castle proves another model. Open the doors, charge admission, reinvest revenue, work slowly, and trust that public interest will sustain the effort. This model has limitations. It works for spectacular, camera-friendly structures with compelling narratives. It wouldn't save a plain worker's cottage, a utilitarian factory, or any of the thousands of historically significant buildings lacking romantic appeal. Boldt Castle's preservation success partly reflects its photogenic tragedy. It's Instagram-ready, story-rich, emotionally resonant. The workers' barracks where Giuseppe and Antonio lived? Gone, demolished, forgotten, not worth saving. The workers' stories, recovered and displayed since 2005, teach perhaps the most important lesson. Every beautiful structure has hidden costs. The museum we visit, the hotel where we stay, the bridge we cross, all were built by people whose names we'll never know, whose wages were insufficient, whose contributions were erased by intentional forgetting. Recovering these stories doesn't diminish architectural beauty. It complicates that beauty, adds depth, restores humanity to narratives that preferred abstraction. Modern preservation increasingly recognizes this obligation. Museums now research not just architects and owners, but builders, servants, and maintenance staff. Exhibits acknowledge labor conditions. Plaques name workers alongside designers. This represents a quiet revolution in how we understand history. Not as stories about great men's great deeds, but as collective human efforts involving countless individuals whose modest contributions created extraordinary results. Boldt Castle also raises questions about intentionality versus outcome. George intended to build a private love nest. Instead, he created a public monument that generates economic activity, employs dozens, attracts scholars, preserves history, and teaches lessons he never meant to teach. The castle's meaning emerged from accident, Louise's death, decades of abandonment, eventual restoration. George lost control of his creation's significance the moment he walked away. This happens often with grand gestures. We create something for one purpose and it serves another. We build for private reasons and it becomes public symbol. We intend one meaning and the world finds different meanings. The gap between intention and interpretation defines cultural production. George wanted to say, "I love you," in stone. The world hears, "Look what wealth built. Look what grief destroyed. Look what labor created. Look what time transforms." The castle's incompleteness also resonates metaphorically. All human projects are unfinished. All relationships are interrupted. All stories lack final chapters because life keeps happening beyond where we stopped paying attention. George's castle, frozen at 93% completion, represents every dream we didn't quite realize, every plan mortality interrupted, every intention circumstances prevented. It's accidentally universal, not despite, but because of its incompletion. Perhaps the deepest lesson concerns visibility. George Boldt is famous, his name on historical markers, his biography in books, his face in photographs. Giuseppe Mancini is nearly forgotten, recovered only through archival research, his contribution acknowledged on a single museum placard. Yet Giuseppe's hands shaped the stones George's money purchased. Both men built the castle. Only one is remembered as builder. This visibility gap reflects power. The wealthy control narratives, commission histories, name buildings after themselves. Workers disappear into collective anonymity. Italian masons, Irish laborers, female staff. Recovering individual names and stories represents a small act of justice, insufficient, incomplete, but necessary. History should remember both the man who dreamed the castle and the men who built it, the woman it honored, and the women who would have cleaned it. Boldt Castle stands at the intersection of love, labor, and loss, three foundational human experiences. It teaches that love can be vast yet futile, that labor builds everything yet receives little credit, that loss transforms meaning in ways we cannot predict or control. These lessons aren't comfortable, but they're honest. And honesty, finally, is what we owe to history. Even romantic history, even tragic history, even history that began with the best intentions and ended in abandonment. The castle George Boldt couldn't finish teaches more than any completed palace could. Chapter 10. Standing Where They Stood, An Invitation. Close your eyes and imagine February 7th, 1904, snow falling softly on the St. Lawrence, 300 men working inside an unfinished castle, their breath visible in the cold air. Then the bell ringing, the foreman's broken voice, the sudden silence of stopped hammers. Imagine Giuseppe Mancini wrapping his tools, knowing his cough will worsen, that the stone dust is killing him, but grateful for wages that let him send money home. Imagine Bridget O'Connor serving final meals to men who will scatter to other construction sites, other brutal jobs, carrying memories of the most beautiful building they'll ever create. Now open your eyes. You're standing in that same space. The stones Giuseppe cut still form these walls. The floors Bridget scrubbed survive beneath your feet. George's grief still echoes in the unfinished rooms. Louise's absence still haunts the completed ones. History isn't distant abstraction. It's this stone, this space, this moment where past and present occupy the same physical location. Boldt Castle asks you to hold multiple truths simultaneously. That it's beautiful, and that beauty had costs. That George's love was genuine, and his workers' exploitation was real. That preservation matters, and that what's preserved is always selective. That romantic stories enchant us, and that complicated truths should challenge us. Tourism often simplifies. We visit monuments expecting inspiration, affirmation, easy meanings. Boldt Castle resists this. It insists on complexity. It commemorates love while acknowledging labor. It celebrates achievement while questioning its methods. It preserves beauty while revealing the machine behind that beauty. This complexity doesn't destroy romance. It deepens it, makes it more human, more honest, more relevant. The workers who built this castle have been dead for decades. George and Louise Boldt have been gone for over a century. But their stories persist because we choose to remember them. Every visitor, every admission ticket, every shared photograph keeps these narratives alive. You're not just touring ruins, you're participating in collective memory, deciding what matters. Enough to preserve. Before you leave Hart Island, take one final look. See the towers Giuseppe raised. Walk the floors Antonio laid. Stand in rooms where Bridget would have worked. Acknowledge the love that inspired this place and the labor that constructed it. Remember that history is always about people. Their dreams, their work, their losses, their persistence. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to our channel for more forgotten histories of America's grandest estates. Comment below with your thoughts about Boldt Castle, about love and labor, about what we preserve and why. These conversations matter. These stories need telling, because every stone remembers. And as long as we're listening, the past keeps speaking.